My family spent the last 10 years introducing me as the useless help desk worker, a background character in my golden boy brother's perfect life. Tonight, he called me a worthless parasite in front of 100 elite guests. I just smiled, pouring his champagne. He had no idea the military-grade smartwatch on my wrist was counting down the seconds until 3 Black Ops soldiers kicked down his door to salute me. Hello to our wonderful audience at Maya Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continued support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to continue operations, which means we must pause all new uploads here and transition our work over to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community to listen to exclusive real-life stories that are even better, significantly longer, and packed with detailed situations we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing the stories to life. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story about a woman named Alyssa Mills, whose silence was mistaken for weakness for far too long. I stood in the shadowed corner of the sprawling kitchen inside my parents' multi-million-dollar estate in Oak Brook, Illinois. I am 32 years old, yet in this house, I am treated as though I am a mildly disappointing adolescent who still cannot figure out how the real world works. The air around me buzzed with the suffocating noise of clinking crystal glasses, the soft hum of a live jazz quartet, and the forced, booming laughter of the suburban elite. Tonight was a dual celebration, a monument to my family's obsession with appearances. My younger brother, Julian, the undisputed golden boy of the Mills family, was celebrating his engagement to a woman whose generational wealth was arguably her most attractive feature. Simultaneously, he was launching his brand new cybersecurity startup to a living room packed tightly with venture capitalists, local politicians, and tech executives. The house smelled of expensive catering, aged wine, and unearned arrogance. I smoothed down the fabric of my faded navy blue dress. It was a plain, off-the-rack garment that stood in stark contrast to the shimmering designer gowns and bespoke Italian suits, floating gracefully through the open floor plan. I was not treated as a guest at my own brother's engagement party. Instead, I had been quietly designated as the unofficial domestic help. Every time my parents caught the eye of a prominent investor looking my way, they offered the same well-rehearsed, deeply patronizing explanation to save face. "That is just our Alyssa," my mother would say, offering a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand while flashing a polite, tight-lipped smile. "She works a little IT help desk job. You know the type. Resetting forgotten passwords and telling frustrated office workers to turn their computers on and off again. She is a sweet girl, but very much single, and just trying to find her footing in a complicated world. We do what we can to support her." I played the part flawlessly, absorbing the subtle insults without a single flinch. I kept my head down, carried a heavy silver tray loaded with flutes of champagne, and silently refilled the glasses of men who looked right through me as if I were merely a piece of the expensive mahogany furniture. They saw a boring, invisible spinster with a dead-end job, a woman with absolutely no ambition and no future. They did not see the truth. The truth was buried beneath layers of classified government clearance and strict non-disclosure agreements that carried the penalty of federal treason. I do not reset passwords for confused accountants. I am a senior threat analyst for Triton Overwatch. We are a ghost intelligence organization and a black book private military contractor that does not exist on any official federal ledger. We specialize in high-value hostage extractions in hostile territories and devastating offensive cyber warfare campaigns. While Julian played pretend with his flashy, buzzword, heavy cybersecurity startup, trying to impress men with deep pockets, I spent my sleepless nights in subterranean command centers. I have dismantled international terror syndicates from a keyboard and guided Black Ops teams through active war zones using nothing but satellite telemetry and sheer willpower. As I poured a glass of vintage sparkling wine for one of Julian's wealthy new investors, I looked across the room at my parents. They were beaming with absolute pride, loudly boasting to anyone who would listen about the initial seed funding Julian had just secured. They spoke endlessly about self-made success, the rewards of hard work, and the brilliant, unmatched intellect of their son. I offered a bitter, silent smile, keeping my eyes fixed on the bubbling golden liquid. They were standing in the middle of a grand vaulted living room, completely oblivious to the fact that their perfect, affluent lifestyle was built on a massive, humiliating lie. For the past 6 years, my parents had been secretly drowning in debt, standing right on the precipice of total bankruptcy. For 6 long years, I had been the one silently paying the massive mortgage on this sprawling Oakbrook mansion, every single dime of my hazard pay. The blood money I earned from dodging digital bullets and keeping our covert operators alive behind enemy lines went straight into an anonymous offshore shell account that automatically paid their bills. I kept a roof over their ungrateful heads. They genuinely believed their pristine credit score and a miracle clerical bank error had saved them from foreclosure. They had no idea it was the extreme danger pay from my highly classified, life-or-death deployments that kept them out of the streets. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic vibration pulsed violently against my left wrist. It was my military-grade smartwatch, a heavily encrypted piece of hardware cleverly disguised as a cheap, generic fitness tracker. It gave 3 short pulses, followed immediately by one long, continuous pulse. It was a proximity alert. An unauthorized, highly trained military asset was moving rapidly toward the exact coordinates of this very mansion. Standard protocol in my line of work dictated that I should immediately establish a secure perimeter, notify federal authorities, and initiate emergency lockdown procedures to protect the ignorant civilians in the building. Instead, I simply adjusted my long sleeve over the glowing watch face, picked up my silver tray of champagne, and stepped right back into the blinding light of the party. I maintained total, icy indifference, let the wealthy guests laugh, let my family boast about their fake empire. The carefully constructed stage they were dancing on was about to be entirely demolished, and I was going to have a front row seat to the destruction. The live jazz quartet faded into a soft, ambient hum as the evening transitioned to its main event. My brother stepped to the absolute center of the grand living room, lifting a heavy silver spoon. He struck it sharply against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The high-pitched ringing sound commanded an immediate, reverent silence from the sea of wealthy guests. Julian stood tall and puffed out his chest, radiating the unearned, reckless confidence of a man who had been handed the entire world on a silver platter. He was the undisputed king of the room, and he made sure everyone knew it. Flanking him closely was Arthur Vance. Arthur was a notoriously ruthless venture capitalist, a titan of industry whose financial power was only matched by his immense, towering arrogance. More importantly for tonight's agenda, he was Julian's future father-in-law. Arthur wore a dark, custom-tailored suit that likely cost more than an average family earned in an entire year. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the room with the absolute entitlement of a predator surveying a fresh kill. He demanded total submission from everyone present, and the crowd eagerly gave it to him. I was moving silently just behind their inner circle, diligently gathering discarded cocktail napkins and half-empty glasses onto my heavy silver tray. I wanted nothing more than to remain a total shadow, a piece of moving furniture. However, an older, perhaps slightly oblivious guest, trying to fill the heavy silence before the speeches officially began, turned his attention directly to me. "And what about you, my dear?" the older gentleman asked politely, his voice carrying much further than he probably intended. "Julian is obviously building a massive empire here, but what is your field of expertise?" I froze for a fraction of a second, balancing the heavy tray against my hip, before I could even open my mouth to offer my standard, rehearsed deflection about working in basic customer service. My brother snatched the moment right out of the air. Julian let out a loud, theatrical sigh. He shook his perfectly styled head, as if my very existence was a tragic, unavoidable comedy that he was personally forced to endure. Her, Julian scoffed, his voice echoing loudly off the vaulted, hand-painted ceilings. She is the ultimate family burden. She works some completely useless, dead-end job, just staring blankly at a cheap monitor all day, waiting for confused middle managers to call her to fix their broken keyboards. It is honestly pathetic to watch. The room grew incredibly tense, but Julian was just getting started. He leaned in, ensuring every investor in his radius caught his next words. If our parents were not generous enough to keep feeding her and giving her a place to hide from the real world, she would probably be sleeping under a highway overpass by now. She has absolutely zero drive and zero future. The cruelty in his voice was not an accident. It was a highly deliberate, calculated performance meant to establish his dominance and show these ruthless businessmen that he shared their complete lack of empathy. I kept my eyes forward, waiting for the natural parental instinct to finally kick in. I waited for my mother or my father to step in, to offer even a tiny, fragile shred of defense for their own flesh and blood. Instead, my father let out a booming, hearty laugh, reaching over to clap Julian firmly on the shoulder. "Oh, do not be so harsh on your older sister, Julian," my father chuckled, though his eyes held absolutely zero warmth as they flicked toward me with mild disgust. "We consider letting her stay in our orbit to be our greatest act of lifelong charity. Every successful family needs a pathetic cautionary tale to keep the motivated ones hungry. Right?" My mother nodded in vigorous agreement, taking a delicate sip of her expensive wine. The sycophantic crowd, taking their cue from the hosts, erupted into polite, restrained laughter. It was the sickening sound of wealthy people enjoying the casual destruction of someone they deemed entirely beneath them. Then, Arthur Vance decided to deliver the final, crushing blow. He lowered his glass and fixed his gaze directly on me. His eyes were like dead, frozen stones. "Do not pity her," Arthur stated, his voice slicing cleanly through the fading chuckles with terrifying precision. "Society requires a massive foundation of mediocrity to function properly. People like her are only born to serve as the dull, gray background, existing solely so that truly great visionary men like Julian can shine even brighter. She is exactly where she belongs, down in the dirt, holding the tray for the winners." The vicious words hung in the air, forming a heavy, suffocating blanket of humiliation that was designed to completely crush whatever spirit I had left. The entire room watched me, waiting for a reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted a pathetic, stammering outburst. They wanted me to drop my head in total shame and run away. I did not cry. My hands did not shake even a fraction of an inch. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The sheer, blinding irony of their ignorance was almost intoxicating. I calmly adjusted my grip on the silver tray, set it down silently on a nearby marble countertop, and turned my back on the glittering, toxic crowd. I had spent a lifetime playing the obedient ghost in this house, and I was more than ready to simply walk away and let them drown in their own manufactured delusions. But as I took my first step toward the swinging kitchen doors, the serene, perfectly insulated bubble of the Oakbrook estate was violently shattered. Outside the grand double oak doors of the main entrance, the piercing, violent screech of heavy, military-grade tires locked into a sudden, aggressive skid tore through the quiet suburban night. The horrific sound of burning rubber was followed immediately by a massive mechanical thud that rattled the expensive front windows in their wooden frames. The party froze. The laughter died instantly. The true reality of my world had just arrived at their front door. The massive, custom-built oak double doors of the mansion did not simply open. They were violently shoved apart with a bone-rattling force that cracked the heavy brass hinges. The sudden explosion of movement sent the expensive floral arrangements in the foyer crashing to the marble floor in a chaotic shower of glass and water. The family's highly paid private security guard, a former police officer who usually spent his shifts checking VIP lists, was completely frozen. He stood pressed flat against the wall, his hands visibly shaking as he wisely chose not to reach for his weapon. Stepping through the shattered threshold were three enormous men. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized fluidity of apex predators. They were entirely clad in pitch black, heavy tactical combat gear. Their combat rigs were completely sterilized, lacking any name tapes, unit patches, or national flags. There was no insignia, no identifying markers, just the sheer, overwhelming presence of absolute lethal force. Every single step they took against the polished marble floor echoed like a war drum, a heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots that instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The live jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. A trumpet player actually dropped his instrument, letting it clatter loudly onto the stage. The arrogant laughter and the smug whispers of the wealthy elite died in a matter of seconds. A suffocating, icy silence descended upon the grand living room. The suffocating arrogance of the suburban billionaires evaporated, instantly replaced by raw, primal terror. The man leading the tactical wedge formation was a giant. His face was a map of brutal, jagged scars, and his eyes carried the thousand-yard stare of a man who had seen the darkest corners of the earth. His right hand was tightly gripped around the handle of a heavy-duty, reinforced alloy Pelican briefcase. The case was secured with multiple biometric locks and heavy steel clasps. My brother, Julian, stood completely paralyzed for a few fleeting seconds. However, his colossal ego quickly overrode his common sense. His face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He was the king of this castle, the golden boy hosting the most important night of his life, and he was not about to let a group of what he assumed were incompetent, lost private security contractors ruin his perfect stage. Julian puffed out his chest, aggressively marching toward the center of the room to intercept the three men. He threw his hand up in a theatrical gesture of absolute authority, pointing a manicured finger directly at the giant leading the group. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure of the room. "Do you have any idea whose house this is? You thuggish rent-a-cops are at the wrong address. You have exactly 10 seconds to turn around and march right back out those doors, or I am calling the police and having all three of you arrested for felony trespassing. Get out of my house." The leader of the squad, Captain Hayes, did not even blink. He did not slow his pace. He did not acknowledge Julian's existence with a single word or a shift in his facial expression. To a man who had survived the most brutal combat zones on the planet, my brother was nothing more than an annoying insect buzzing in the background. As Julian stepped directly into his path, trying to physically block the advance, Hayes simply raised one massive, Kevlar-reinforced forearm. With a casual, almost effortless sweep, he shoved Julian aside. The force of the shove sent my golden boy brother stumbling awkwardly backward, his expensive leather dress shoes slipping on the spilled champagne until he crashed hard against a cocktail table, sending crystal glasses shattering all over the floor. Nobody moved to help Julian. The venture capitalists and the politicians were too busy holding their breath, pressing themselves against the walls as far away from the Black Ops team as possible. Captain Hayes stopped in the exact center of the room. His cold, predatory eyes methodically scanned the crowd of trembling billionaires and terrified socialites. The air was thick with the undeniable scent of fear. Then, his hardened gaze bypassed the glittering centerpieces and the weeping guests, cutting straight through the crowd until it locked onto the shadowed corner of the kitchen. His eyes locked onto me. Hayes altered his trajectory, walking with heavy, deliberate purpose straight toward the woman in the faded navy blue dress. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, terrified to even breathe in his direction. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. The two massive operators flanking him moved with perfect precision, stepping up to his left and right. Then, before the stunned, disbelieving eyes of my parents, my furious brother, and 100 of the most powerful people in the state, the impossible happened. The three towering, blood-stained ghosts of the battlefield snapped their bodies into rigid, flawless posture. The heavy heels of their combat boots slammed together with a deafening crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent mansion. In perfect, mechanical unison, all three men raised their right hands in a crisp, sharp military salute, holding it with absolute reverence. Captain Hayes lifted his chin, his booming, authoritative voice shattering the last remnants of the fake world my family had built. "Reporting. Commander Overwatch Actual," Hayes bellowed, his voice filled with unquestionable respect and fierce loyalty. "Echo Squad has returned." The entire room shattered into a million fragmented pieces of disbelief. The absolute shock that seized the grand living room was so profound it felt as though gravity itself had suddenly been reversed. Julian, who just seconds ago had been parading around like a conqueror, was now reduced to a stuttering, pale shadow. He pushed himself off the cocktail table, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, completely incapable of forming a single coherent syllable. My parents were completely frozen in place, their skin turning an ashen, sickly white. They stared at the three towering giants saluting me, their minds violently rejecting the reality unfolding before their very eyes. How could their useless, pathetic daughter, the woman they had treated as a domestic servant just minutes prior, command the absolute reverence of heavily armed, terrifying commandos? I slowly lowered my arm, bringing it to my side, and gave a sharp, single nod. The three men dropped their salute in perfect, crisp unison. Captain Hayes stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the marble. He carefully placed the reinforced pelican case onto the long dining table, right next to a silver platter of untouched caviar and crystal champagne flutes. The heavy metallic clacking of the biometric locks disengaging sounded like gunshots echoing in the dead silence of the room. The venture capitalists, including Arthur Vance, craned their necks forward. Given their immense greed and shallow worldviews, they likely expected the case to hold stacks of unmarked bills, bearer bonds, or perhaps stolen corporate secrets. Instead, Hayes flipped the heavy lid open to reveal a bed of dark, crushed velvet. Resting on top of the fabric were several jagged, gray pieces of twisted shrapnel, their sharp edges permanently stained with dried, rusted blood. Placed perfectly in the center of the debris was a heavy, obsidian-black piece of metal attached to a dark crimson ribbon. It was a shadow medal. It was the highest clandestine honor our government could possibly bestow, a commendation strictly reserved for the unsung heroes who bleed in the dark so the rest of the world can sleep in the light. It was an award that did not officially exist on any public record, given for a shadow war that was never declared to the public. Hayes did not look at me. He slowly turned his massive, scarred frame to face my trembling family. His eyes locked onto Julian with a level of pure, unadulterated contempt that made the young, arrogant tech executive shrink back in genuine, primal terror. 8 months ago, Hayes began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the absolute, breathless attention of every single soul in the room. My team and I were completely compromised deep inside hostile territory. We were pinned down on a barren, rocky outcrop in a country that officially denies our existence. We were entirely cut off, out of ammunition, and completely surrounded by an enemy battalion closing in from all sides. We had lost all communication with Central Command. We were bleeding out from shrapnel wounds, baking in 120-degree heat, just waiting for the executioners to close the perimeter. He took a slow, heavy step toward Julian. My brother instinctively backed away, his expensive shoes scraping against the floor as he bumped into a terrified local politician. The enemy deployed a massive swarm of autonomous hunter drones to finish us off, Hayes continued, the raw trauma of that horrific day bleeding into his heavy, unforgiving words. We could hear the buzzing in the sky. We had less than 5 minutes left to live. We were preparing to say our final prayers to whatever God would listen, and then the impossible happened. A single operator, sitting alone in a dark room thousands of miles away, completely bypassed the impenetrable firewall of a classified military satellite network. She forcefully hijacked the enemy communications array. Hayes pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at me, though his burning eyes never left my brother's terrified, pale face. "The woman you just called a worthless parasite," Hayes snarled, his voice rising in volume and intensity until it rattled the crystal chandeliers above. She single-handedly crashed the entire enemy drone network in a matter of seconds. She burned out their motherboards from half a world away, dropping them right out of the sky. But she did not stop there. With our radios completely destroyed and our visual monitors blinded by the dust, she accessed the biometric sensors inside our tactical gear. She used the tiny haptic feedback motors against our skin to tap out extraction coordinates in Morse code. She guided us, step by blind step, through an active, live minefield in the dead of night. She dragged us out of absolute hell by the scruff of our necks. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating and heavy. You could hear the ragged, terrified breathing of the wealthy guests who had mocked me only moments before. Hayes leaned down, placing his scarred, weathered face just inches away from Julian. My brother was now visibly shaking, sweating profusely, completely stripped of his unearned arrogance and his fake bravado. "She does not fix computers," Hayes said, enunciating every single syllable with a crushing physical force. "She is the god of the digital battlefield. She holds the lives of the most dangerous men on the planet in her bare hands. If it were not for her unmatched brilliance, our bones would currently be bleaching in the desert sand, entirely forgotten by the world you people so safely enjoy." I shifted my cold gaze to my mother. Her perfectly painted lips were trembling violently. Her expensive diamond earrings shook as a horrifying, earth-shattering realization finally crashed down upon her. I watched the exact moment her mind connected all the disjointed dots. She remembered all those long, silent nights over the past 6 years. She remembered complaining over afternoon tea to her wealthy country club friends about how her daughter was antisocial, how I always locked my bedroom door and refused to come out for their meaningless social events. She remembered mocking me cruelly at the breakfast table when I came downstairs with bloodshot, exhausted eyes, accusing me of staying up late playing silly video games or suffering from pathetic, dramatic bouts of depression that I needed to simply get over. Now, she knew the terrifying truth. I was not depressed. I was not hiding from the world. While she was sleeping comfortably in the luxurious mansion that I had secretly been paying for, I was running high stakes, life or death military operations. I was watching brave men die on thermal imaging cameras, making split-second, devastating decisions that determined the fate of international security. The dark circles under my eyes were not a sign of failure. They were the physical toll of carrying the weight of human lives. My mother raised a shaking, frail hand to her mouth, a small, pathetic whimper escaping her throat. She looked at me not with the familiar disgust and deep disappointment she had harbored for decades, but with complete, overwhelming awe mixed with a deep, sickening wave of shame. The useless, invisible ghost of the family had just been revealed as a titan, a woman who commanded the absolute, unquestioning loyalty of the deadliest warriors on earth. The heavy velvet curtain had been violently ripped away, and the fragile, pathetic stage my family had spent their entire lives building was finally collapsing under the unbearable weight of the truth. The crowd stood in stunned silence, fully expecting a tearful, emotional reunion. They waited for me to break down, to humbly accept the towering, blood-stained medal resting on the velvet cushion. They wanted a heartwarming climax to this bizarre interruption, a moment where the misunderstood daughter finally proved her worth to her family. But I did not smile. I did not shed a single tear. I did not even reach for the commendation. Instead, my posture shifted. The passive, invisible servant vanished, entirely replaced by the cold, calculating apex predator that I had been trained to be. My eyes bypassed my weeping mother. They completely ignored my trembling, humiliated brother. My gaze locked onto a single target hiding in the back of the terrified crowd. Arthur Vance. The notoriously ruthless venture capitalist was no longer projecting the aura of an untouchable titan. The smug, arrogant sneer had been violently wiped from his face, leaving behind a sickly, chalky white complexion. Unlike my naive, superficial family, a man like Vance recognized the sheer, unadulterated danger of an off-the-books hit squad. He knew exactly what the lack of military insignia meant, while the rest of the room was paralyzed by shock. Vance was slowly, desperately inching backward, trying to quietly slip through the ornate glass doors that led to the side gardens. He was exactly 3 steps away from freedom when I raised my left wrist. I did not shout. I did not order the soldiers to chase him. I simply extended my index finger and tapped the cracked glass face of my smartwatch exactly 3 times. The response was instantaneous. A heavy synchronized series of deep mechanical thuds echoed violently throughout the entire mansion. The advanced smart home security system, the very same system my brother had spent all evening bragging about to his wealthy investors, was instantly hijacked. Every single electronic deadbolt in the house slammed shut. The reinforced steel security shutters, designed to protect the estate during severe storms, violently dropped over every window and exterior door, plunging the massive living room into a claustrophobic, inescapable vault. Vance yanked frantically at the brass handle of the side door. It did not budge. He was completely trapped. A sudden, loud burst of static crackled from the stage. The massive, 85-inch flat-screen television that had been proudly displaying the sleek, modern logo of Julian's brand-new cybersecurity startup abruptly blacked out. A collective gasp rippled through the terrified crowd as the screen flared back to life. However, the corporate branding was gone. In its place, a chaotic, rapidly scrolling waterfall of financial data flooded the screen. They were banking ledgers, thousands of lines of highly classified financial transactions, offshore routing numbers, shell company registrations, and encrypted cryptocurrency wallets were cascading down the massive display in bright, glaring white text. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, leaving the shadow of the kitchen for the very first time all evening. The crowd practically parted for me, their eyes wide with sheer terror. "Did you really think," I began, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings with a terrifying, absolute calm, "that I spent my entire evening serving cheap champagne to people I despise just out of a sense of twisted family loyalty? I am not here for an engagement party. I am here on a highly classified, federally sanctioned manhunt." I pointed a finger toward the massive screen. The scrolling text suddenly stopped, freezing on a heavily highlighted, bright red transaction record. 8 months ago, when Captain Hayes and Echo Squad were ambushed in that desert, it was not a random stroke of bad luck, I stated, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees with every single word I spoke. They were waiting for them. The enemy militia had exact, pinpoint global positioning coordinates. Someone inside our logistical supply chain sold the encrypted flight paths and the extraction points to the highest bidder. My eyes snapped back to the terrified billionaire desperately pressing himself against the locked glass door. "The price for the lives of American heroes was exactly $12 million, I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like a razor blade. "Paid directly into a completely anonymous, decentralized crypto wallet. It took me 6 exhaustive months to crack the military-grade encryption on that ledger. But once I broke through the firewall, I followed the digital blood trail. I tracked that $12 million as it was frantically washed through 14 different shell companies located in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Switzerland." Arthur Vance began to visibly hyperventilate. His expensive designer tie was suddenly choking him. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny the accusation, but his vocal cords completely failed him. "And where did that massive river of dirty, blood-soaked money finally end up?" I asked. Tilting my head slightly, I tapped my watch one more time. The screen flashed again. A massive, undeniable corporate charter appeared, linking the final, heavily obscured bank account directly to the primary holding corporation owned and operated by Arthur Vance. The crowd erupted into horrified, frantic whispers. The wealthy elite physically backed away from Vance as if he were suddenly infected with a lethal plague. Julian, completely broken and utterly confused by the rapidly escalating nightmare, desperately tried to cling to the last fragile shred of his crumbling reality. He stumbled forward, raising a trembling hand toward the giant screen. "No," Julian stammered, his voice pathetic and incredibly weak. "No, this is impossible. My company is secure. My servers are running military-grade encryption. You cannot just hack into my presentation. Arthur is a legitimate investor. He is backing my cybersecurity firm. My tech is unhackable. I finally looked directly at my brother. A cold, hollow laugh escaped my lips. It was the laugh of someone who was staring at a completely delusional child. Your cybersecurity firm, I mocked, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to shrink back. Julian, you do not have a cybersecurity firm. You have a glorified money laundering machine. You are nothing but a convenient, useful idiot. Julian's jaw dropped. The cruel insult he had thrown at me earlier tonight was now echoing violently inside his own empty head. Arthur Vance did not invest millions of dollars into your pathetic little startup because you are some kind of misunderstood tech genius, I explained, leaning in close so he could hear the absolute truth shattering his fragile ego. He funded you because he needed a legitimate domestic front to clean the dirty money he made from selling military secrets. He looked at you and saw the perfect patsy. He saw an arrogant, narcissistic, utterly incompetent golden boy who was far too obsessed with throwing flashy parties and wearing expensive suits to ever bother checking the back-end code of his own software. Julian was shaking uncontrollably, tears of pure humiliation welling up in his eyes as he looked from me to the massive screen, and then finally to his future father-in-law, who was currently completely avoiding his gaze. You stood in front of this entire room and called me a worthless parasite, I whispered, the venom in my voice finally bleeding through the icy exterior. You bragged about your impenetrable fortress of code, and yet it took me exactly 3 seconds and 3 taps on a cheap plastic fitness tracker to completely dismantle your entire system, hijack your network, and lock down your own house. You are the ultimate background character. Julian, a disposable pawn in a game you are too stupid to even realize you are playing. The complete, absolute destruction of his pride was spectacular to witness. The boy who had spent his entire life looking down on me was now entirely crushed under the unbearable weight of his own profound mediocrity. His engagement, his company, his wealth, and his entire identity were utterly annihilated in a matter of minutes, and I was the one holding the match. I turned my back on my brother, leaving him suffocating in his own pathetic despair, and focused the full, terrifying weight of my attention back onto Arthur Vance. The billionaire was now sweating profusely, his hands frantically patting his pockets, desperately searching for a phone that had already been entirely jammed by the localized signal scrambler emitting from my watch. He was a man who was accustomed to buying his way out of every single problem, but he could not buy off the 3 towering angels of death currently blocking the exits, and he certainly could not buy my silence. The financial logs on that screen. I projected my voice to the entire room, making sure every politician and investor heard the absolute death knell of Vance's empire. Have already been transmitted to the Cyber Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Internal Audit Department of the Internal Revenue Service. As we speak, federal warrants are being executed at every single one of your corporate offices across the country. Your assets are frozen. Your offshore accounts are seized. You have absolutely nothing left. Vance let out a guttural, panicked noise, pressing his hands against the reinforced glass. He looked like a trapped animal staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. The trap had not just closed, it had completely obliterated him. Arthur Vance realized his entire life was over. The billionaire's carefully cultivated self-preservation instinct abruptly snapped, entirely replaced by a blinding, irrational rage. He let out a feral roar, lowering his shoulder and lunging directly at me with his hands outstretched, aiming fiercely for my throat. He did not even make it 2 steps. In less than half a second, the massive operator standing to my right moved. It was a blur of pure tactical precision. The soldier stepped effortlessly into Vance's path, grabbed the billionaire by his expensive silk lapels, and violently swept his legs out from under him. Vance hit the polished marble floor with a sickening, heavy thud that instantly knocked all the wind out of his lungs. The soldier immediately planted a heavy combat boot firmly on the center of Vance's chest. pinning the wealthy tycoon to the ground like a helpless insect. Vance gasped desperately for air, his face turning a deep shade of purple, completely immobilized under the crushing weight of the operative. Right on cue, the piercing, overlapping wails of emergency sirens tore through the quiet suburban night. The heavy steel security shutters I had locked down began to glow with the relentless, strobing flashes of red and blue lights. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially arrived. The room descended into absolute pandemonium. The wealthy investors, powerful politicians, and glamorous socialites scrambled like rats on a rapidly sinking ship, shoving each other out of the way in a frantic attempt to distance themselves from Julian and Vance. Julian's fiancée tore the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger, threw it squarely at my brother's chest, and stormed away in angry tears. In the span of a few chaotic minutes, Julian's carefully constructed empire, his impending marriage, and his pristine reputation were completely vaporized into thin air. Julian collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he fell heavily to his knees, right in the middle of the shattered glass and spilled champagne. My mother and father rushed to his side, but they did not try to comfort him. Instead, they all turned their tear-streaked, desperate faces up toward me. The arrogant, wealthy people who had gleefully mocked my existence exactly 30 minutes ago were now kneeling on the floor at my feet, weeping openly. "Please," Julian sobbed, his voice cracking pitifully, raising his trembling hands toward me in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "Please, you have to stop this. You work for the government. You are a commander. You can make a call. You can tell them I did not know about the money laundering. You can fix this. Please, sister, save us." My mother grabbed the hem of my faded navy blue dress, her expensive mascara running down her pale cheeks in thick, dark rivers. "We are your family. You cannot just destroy us like this. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You have to protect your brother." I looked down at the three of them. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no sorrow. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single word of scolding or cursing. The burning inferno of vengeance they fully expected to see in my eyes was completely absent, replaced only by a cold, absolute emptiness. I slowly reached into my small, worn leather shoulder bag and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. My father's eyes lit up with a brief, desperate flash of hope. He thought it was a federal pardon, a classified immunity agreement, or a powerful document that would magically erase their nightmare. I did not hand it to him. I calmly walked over to the messy cocktail table, carefully avoiding the broken crystal, and placed the envelope right next to the reinforced case holding the shadow metal. I slid the thick stack of papers out of the envelope, revealing the official state seals and the heavy black ink. "That is not a pardon," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying with absolute clarity over the sound of the approaching sirens and the pounding on the front doors. "Those are the full, unencumbered property deeds to this estate. I bought out your entire crippling mortgage 3 years ago. I own the ground you are kneeling on." My parents stared at the legal documents, the final, crushing realization draining whatever life they had left in their bodies. The massive house they loved more than their own daughter belonged entirely to the woman they had treated like a stray dog. "This house is my parting gift," I stated quietly, looking at them one last time. "You can keep the walls, you can keep the empty rooms, but from tomorrow morning, I no longer have a family." I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on the pathetic scene, my low heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Captain Hayes and his 2 men instantly fell into a tight, protective diamond formation around me. As the operator lifted his boot off Vance's chest, and the federal agents began breaching the front entrance with heavy battering rams, we walked seamlessly through the side exit. I left behind the desperate, agonizing screams of my mother and the pathetic, broken sobbing of my brother. The crisp, cool night air hit my face as I stepped out into the driveway, where a massive black armored sport utility vehicle was waiting with the engine running. Captain Hayes opened the heavy passenger door for me. I stepped inside, the thick bulletproof glass sliding shut and completely cutting off the sounds of the collapsing suburban dynasty. The vehicle accelerated smoothly into the dark. Quiet night. I did not look back. This was not a violent revenge. It was the ultimate, absolute punishment of permanently removing my existence from their lives forever. Thank you so much to our incredible audience for listening to this story with us today. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story captivating, we ask for your vital support. As mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization, meaning we absolutely cannot upload new videos here for the foreseeable future, and we are transitioning our entire operation to Patreon. Please help keep our work alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to the absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. We cannot wait to see you there for our next incredible journey.